Today's legislative hearing on H.R. 3593, H.R. 4261, H.R. 4281, and two pieces of draft legislation. The five bills we will be considering today are the product of extensive investigations conducted by this subcommittee in the course of its oversight duties that have revealed poor judgment, chronic mismanagement, and a general lack of accountability by the Department of Veterans Affairs. These bills are intended to heighten protection for our veterans and improve services provided by the VA. First, we will hear about H.R. 3593, the VA Construction Assistance Act of 2013, which Ranking Member Kirkpatrick and myself introduced on November 13th, 2013. This bill recognizes the tremendous problems associated with VA major construction projects in Aurora, Colorado, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Orlando, Florida, as identified by an O&I investigation and substantiated by a GAO report. According to these findings, VA is delayed an average of 35 months with an average cost overrun of $366 million. This legislation requires the VA to use the Army Corps of Engineers as a special project manager to assist in completing these projects closer to their original budget and completion dates. Notably, this bill is supported by the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Jim Nicholson. Second, we will address H.R. 4261, the Gulf War Health Research Reform Act of 2014, which I introduced last week along with Ranking Member Kirkpatrick and full committee Ranking Member Michaud. This bill reinstills the independence originally expected of the Research Advisory Committee for Gulf War Illnesses, which includes overseeing VA's research on Gulf War illnesses in order to improve the lives of those suffering as a result of such illnesses. Third, we will hear about H.R. 4281, the Protecting Business Opportunities for Veterans Act of 2014, sponsored by the Honorable Tim Huelskamp of Kansas. H.R. 4281 will make tremendous strides at holding accountable the bad actors that attempt to defraud service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses and other veteran-owned small businesses of crucial set-asides they receive in business. Fourth, we will discuss a piece of draft legislation titled the Biological Implant Tracking and Veteran Safety Act of 2014. This legislation requires the VA to implement a standard identification protocol for biological implants that is consistent with the FDA's unique identification system. The system must allow for the tracking of implants from donor to recipients. This bill also requires the VA to procure biological implants only from vendors using the system and only through competitive procurement processes. Ultimately, this legislation will improve VA's ability to prevent the implantation of contaminated tissue and also to notify veterans in cases of FDA recalls. Finally, we will hear about the draft directive titled the Veteran Information Security Improvement Act of 2014, which is sponsored by the Honorable Jackie Walorski from Indiana. This IT security directive is designed to assist VA in mitigating known information security weaknesses and prevent, limit, and detect unauthorized access to its networks and systems. It also identifies detailed actions and tasks consistent with current federal requirements that should be taken by VA to address its longstanding information security challenges. Once again, I would like to thank all those in attendance for joining us in our discussion today. And I now recognize Ranking Member Kirkpatrick from Arizona for 5 minutes. Ms. Fiotes, in Denver, VA asked for bids based on the presumption that it would produce a $604 million project for the hospital, but it appears VA has produced potentially $1 billion incomplete design, which they provided 8 months after the bid process was completed. How can VA prevent such loss of control in future designs?
Mr. Chairman, we believe that the project designs we have delivered, albeit somewhat later than originally anticipated, are in fact able to be constructed within the appropriated amount for this project.
Ms. Fiotes, you referenced the new Las Vegas facility in your testimony as an example of VA completing major construction. However, according to the GAO report, Las Vegas was $260 million over budget and 74 months late. So is this representative of VA major construction efficiency, this project?
Mr. Chairman, in our response to the GAO draft report, the VA outlined that it did not agree with the methodology the GAO was using to assess time and cost against these projects. Starting at some point in the very early planning stages when the project and not even the site were actually defined, and then taking that number and that schedule as the basis for comparing to what ultimately happened many years later with a real design and a real site and a real construction project, we believe was not an accurate depiction. So we would argue that the time and the cost should be judged against the appropriated amount by Congress at the time the construction is bid, and in that sense we would state that the project was in fact delivered on time and on budget.
So you're saying that are you saying that this project was delivered on budget and on time, the Las Vegas project?
Based on the way that we account for time and budget, yes.
Wow. Well, the GAO obviously differs with you, and I think what was so compelling about the GAO report was that in the report it referenced the Army Corps of Engineers as building the same projects, or what it called similar projects, for the Department of Defense on budget and on schedule. Ms. Fiotes, do you believe that contractors submit excessive or unwarranted change orders to drive up cost or cause delays? How does VA manage the change order process?
Mr. Chairman, the change order process is a very critical process in the duration of the construction of any large complex project. And we recognized, as did some of the GAO reports, that our process was too lengthy and too cumbersome, resulting in delays in the execution of the change orders and the payment of those change orders. We have since addressed those challenges. We have put in place new policies. We've established metrics for the change orders. We've added staff. We've added legal counsel to help us with the review of the change orders. And we are in a much better position now and are processing our change orders at a much better rate than in the past. We hope within the next several months to be completely caught up with our backlog.
So when the GAO report says that VA's, these major medical construction projects are delayed an average of 35 months each, with an average overrun of $360 million each, you differ with GAO and you say that you can produce accounting standards that erase those delays and erase the amount that's over budget? You can come up with that?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't reference accounting standards. I just referenced our response to the GAO, which the GAO included in their final report, although they did not agree with our approach. It is that we measure time from the time a construction project is awarded, not from the time it is conceived, and we measure cost from the time the full amount is appropriated, not from the time the project was conceived. That was the difference between our evaluation of time and schedule and the GAO's evaluation.
Well, it's whatever you say it is on any given day. Ranking Member Kirkpatrick, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Kelly, what do you believe explains the lengthy delays and overruns in VA major construction projects?
Unfortunately, I think sometimes politics gets in the way within VA, within the community, within Congress. There's everybody's got their vision of what it should be, and the ball starts rolling. Those visions change along the way to meet the needs of the politics, not necessarily the veterans. And then as that works out, the needs of the veterans are taken into account.
Mr. Benz, please briefly describe how VA has interfered, undermined, or impeded the work of the RAC.
Well, VA has removed our charter's charge to review the effectiveness of government research. That means that you, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and the public will not know what an independent body of scientists and veterans considers is happening within VA research. And as you will see from reviewing the draft, which had to be removed from our report, which I've attached to my written testimony, that is a serious indictment indeed. The latest action that has been taken is that each committee member in the letter inviting them to attend the next meeting, which we are asked to sign, acknowledges that we will not share any information, reports, recommendations produced at the meeting without the written approval of VA. Even the pretense that the committee is independent has been removed. So you will not ever hear from a RAC chairman in the future, I can assure you, who has not had each and every word of his testimony vetted and written for him or her.
Ms. Sumato, what does autonomy for the RAC accomplish for Gulf War vets?
Well, I think that certainly the more people we have involved in this process, and the more, I don't know if I want to say competition, but it shouldn't, this is not something that should be handled by one organization or one agency. And so having the RAC and having them being able to provide an individual opinion on what is happening in the VA, I think is only a positive thing. I think our veterans are going to benefit by having that, having another set of eyes on what's happening.
Very well. Mr. Kelly, your testimony mentions cost overruns and adversarial relationships between VA and contractors. There was evidence that such problems occurred in Denver or in Aurora and possibly other sites where VA asked for bids based on the presumption that it would produce, in the situation of Aurora, a $600 million project. But it appears VA has produced a project potentially much more expensive than that in terms of its design, which they provided 8 months after the bid process was completed. What should VA do to maintain control of construction designs in the future?
I think going to the design-build model will help. It puts the contractor in the process early on in the process. So you don't get an architect who's got a grand design of a beautiful building that might not be practical. And then when the build starts, the contractor has to come in and say that this space isn't going to be right. And then there's confrontation between the contractor and the architect, which also puts conflict with what VA's had asked for to begin with and what the outcome's going to be. So I think putting those two together at the very beginning of the process, so the architect and the contractor are on the same page, that the outcome will be cheaper, because you're not running into cost overruns when you bid on a design and then you realize, well, what we need in here isn't going to fit in the design that we have, and we have to go back and fix this. Now we've got change orders, we've got design redos that increase time, increase cost.